Very good morning. You're watching NewsX and I'm Shivani Singh. Russian President Vladimir Putin is scheduled to arrive in New Delhi today for a two-day state visit at the invitation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This marks his first trip to India since the war in Ukraine began. This visit aims to reaffirm the long-standing strategic partnership amid US pressures, including sanctions and tariffs on Indian purchases of Russian energy. Energy cooperation is a cornerstone of the summit, driven by Russia's need to sustain exports under sanctions and India's quest for affordable, reliable supplies. India's crude imports are set to hit a 3-year low this month, after the tightening of sanctions on Russia that coincide with its growing purchases of US oil and gas. Now let's take a look at what Russia and India want from each other when it comes to trade in energy. Now remember that trade in energy is very important and forms the cornerstone of India-Russia relations. India is looking at affordable, reliable energy supplies, and Russia is looking to provide that despite the sanctions. Now when we look at the energy trade, what India needs from Russia is a steady supply of discounted oil to protect consumers from price volatility and maintain refining profitability. So it wants to make sure, India actually wants to make sure that the price volatility in the crude oil does not go on towards the customer, and Russia can provide us with cheap oil, and it can also provide us this stability and reliable supply that we actually need in times of global disruptions. Secondly, India requires Russian support on new nuclear reactors, including small modular reactors and fuel supply for expanding its civil nuclear program. Now remember that this is a very important year for India. We are looking to expand our civil nuclear program, and in that Russia can play a very big role in the fuel domain. What does Russia need from India on the energy trade? Moscow wants India to maintain higher purchases after some Indian refineries stopped imports under sanctions pressure. So remember that US put a lot of sanctions on India and Russia. So obviously the first knee-jerk reaction was to stop purchases, and hence Russian oil industry was actually impacted when India had to reduce, and we just told you that it is at a 3-year low, the imports of oil from Russia. So Russia also needs India's continued imports to offset the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil and to sustain its energy revenue flaws. So now remember that these are the two companies that were the most affected when the sanctions were put in place. India had also stopped imports from them. Now Russia wants that India should continue the imports, and it should be able to maintain the revenue that comes in from actually energy trade. So this is a very important cornerstone that will be in fact discussed between both the nations going forward. Joining us on the broadcast is Ambassador Gauri Shankar Gupta, former diplomat, and Group Captain UK Devnath, retired, a defence expert. I thank both of you for joining us on the broadcast and appreciate your time. Ambassador, sir, if I could come across to you, when you look at trade and when you look at trade in energy between both the nations, India is also looking at developing its civil nuclear program, and that's where Russia actually comes in and plays a very important role. How do you also look at this going forward?
Shivani, you are absolutely right. You see, in our relations with Russia, there are two most important aspects. One is the defense related equipment, which we have been importing for a long time. And the second one is the energy security. Energy security both in terms of crude oil as well as nuclear energy. Now, Russia, so far as Russia is concerned, they have not really objected to our deepening relations with the US, but US has been a hurdle whenever we deepen our relations with Russia. When we import defense-related equipment, they object. When we import oil and gas, they object. So this issue has to be resolved and discussed. I think President Putin would be very happy if we can, be independent in this respect without getting impacted by the US sanctions and US constraints. But in the international politics, as you know, we have to do a balancing job. So for us, it would be a balancing job because we also need to have reasonably good relations with US, where we also have a lot of important issues or of collaboration. So this kind of trade-off will be required here. Now this trade-off will be discussed, I'm sure, between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi. And Prime Minister Modi will explain our position that how far we can go on this issue. Because you remember till last month, our oil imports from Russia were very high. In fact, last year's our trade was almost $67 billion, which was much higher than previous year because of the oil imports. But after sanction on some of the oil companies by US, particularly companies like Niara, which has a big stake in India, our imports have declined somewhat. And we would like to continue these imports because we can't abandon a source of energy supply which is reliable and which is priced reasonably well for our requirements. So this is a trade-off we will have to discuss, and I think the Russians understand our position very well. They have shown their understanding on this issue in the past, and I'm sure they will continue to show that. And now, since US wants to improve relations with Russia, in fact, the president's son-in-law was there in Russia 2 days ago, discussing with President Putin himself. So obviously, US should understand our position as well. We are importing almost 80% of our energy needs from abroad, and we cannot rely on one single source. We have to diversify, and in so many cases US has put sanctions like it against Iran, where we cannot import. They have put sanctions against Venezuela, from where we cannot import. So this kind of sanctions on import by India of energy needs cannot continue everywhere. We have to find our own resources, and I think we will have to stick to a position that reasonable relations in energy sector are pursued with Russia. So far as the nuclear energy is concerned, I think Russia has made some new advances. They have even developed some very small portable nuclear reactors which can be shipped from one place to another and made operational in case of emergency. So this is one area where we have been engaged with Russia for a long time. We have several reactors in Tamil Nadu and some in Rajasthan. I think civil nuclear energy is another important source to meet our energy requirements, and this expansion, I'm sure, will be discussed. There is already a talk to set up some new nuclear reactors in Rajasthan as well as in South. So I think these will be the cornerstone of our discussions, apart from technology in defense areas, where we are talking about more imports of S-400, and also talk about technology transfer and import of Su-57, the fifth generation fighter aircraft, which Russia has offered to sell to India. And we have one advantage with Russia, that they are not the seller only. They transfer technology, they start co-production in India, and they even allow export of those equipment to third country. Like BrahMos missile has been exported to Philippines and will be exported to some more countries. So I think Russia has been very comfortable with India. We have been very comfortable with Russia. Our friendship is time tested, spanning over almost 8 decades now, since 47, from the very beginning of our independence. And so far as the US is concerned, we have been having fluctuating relationship. Sometime it improves, sometime it goes down. When we had nuclear test in 98, a lot of sanctions were imposed on us by US, also by other Western countries. But Russia was the one which was supporting us. And then again now Trump, in the beginning, he was very positive, but then he started putting sanctions against India. Now India is the only country in the world where a supplementary tariff of 25% has been levied against India for imports from Russia. Now
Right.
that is not levied against China, not levied against Turkey, not levied against some of the European countries which are still importing oil and gas from there in large quantity. So this is very, very unfortunate. So we have to see how far we can rely on US, because in the face of uh, uncertainties in energy supply in the world, we have to depend on Russia to great extent in the coming future. Over to
Absolutely,
you, Shivani.
absolutely. In fact, let me go across to Group Captain UK Devnath, who's also live on the broadcast with us. Group Captain Devnath, when we look at the defense sector, that's one of the most talked about topics. However, I want to focus on the Su-57 fighter jets, and I want to talk about those missile systems that we want to co-develop, jointly develop with Russia, because India's got offers from France as well for 5th generation aircrafts, but we are turning towards Russia again.
Oh yes, there is absolutely no doubt that relations between India and Russia, especially on defense matters, is very very sensitive, very very close. Strategic depth is there. Russia has been part of India's development since independence. If we remember 1950s, 1960s, during um, 5 year development programs, Russia helped us to develop Bhilai, Bokaro steel plants. Panchvarshi Yojana's, all the big factories and capital projects were mostly financed and technical depth provided by Russian engineers. Now, as far as defense is concerned, definitely India and Russia are very close. We can remember 1962 war. During immediately after 1962 war, Russia provided us with MiG-21 fighter aircraft. Thereafter, we have depended continuously on Russia for MiG-23, MiG-25, MiG-27, MiG-29, and now Sukhoi 30. Sukhoi 30 remains backbone of Indian Air Force. S-400 has been a game changer as far as Indo-Russian cooperation in defense field is concerned. S-400 showed its versatility during Operation Sindoor, highly successful. We have already contracted 5 squadrons of S-400. 3 have already come, 2 are likely to come in 2026. If all goes well, probably an understanding LOI will be signed during President Putin's visit, wherein India may go ahead and purchase 5 more squadrons of S-400. So in another 5 or 10 years, we will have 10 squadrons of S-400 with us. Panchir air defense missile system is another very very effective
Right.
air defense missile system. It has proved its worth during Ukraine-Russo war. Indian Air Force is very keen to purchase Panchir air defense missile system as a gap filler. You see, when S-400 is deployed, though we say that range of S-400 is 400 kilometer, but between two S-400 squadrons, there is always a gap, especially at low altitude. So these low altitude gaps will be filled up in future by Panchir air defense missile system. As far as Sukhoi 57 is concerned, it's a big ticket agenda. Indian Air Force is very keen to acquire a 5th generation fighter aircraft, stealth fighter aircraft. China claims that it has more than 300 J-20 stealth fighter aircraft. China has also developed J-35 stealth fighter aircraft. As per reports, they already have more than 40 of them. Pakistan is also trying to negotiate with China for a squadron or 2 squadron of J-35. In that scenario, India definitely needs a stealth fighter aircraft. Donald Trump and USA have been putting pressure on India to purchase F-35. Russia has already offered Sukhoi 57, transfer of technology too. Now this remains a very very politically this will be a political decision taken at government of India level, whether to go in for F-35 or Sukhoi 57. As far as Indian Air Force is concerned, we are keen about Sukhoi 57 because HAL already has basic infrastructure to manufacture Sukhoi 57 in
Right,
India.
sir. And in fact,
HAL
our pilots are also having been trained on Sukhois earlier as well. I think Sukhoi 57 makes more sense for the Indian Air Force. I also want to rope in Manan Dwivedi, foreign affairs expert, who is joining us on the broadcast. Manan Dwivedi, I believe this entire visit, apart from trade deals, apart from defense deals, this is a lot more about posturing. Both the countries under sanctions and both out there to prove a point.
I personally feel that India and the Raisina and Kremlin, they have always enjoyed a very fruitful and a very conducive and affirmative relationship with each other. But let us not forget the point. As an independent thinking denizen, I would just like to contend that it was the impact of socialism and to a certain extent communism which initially brought the oppressed nationalities of the world together. And that was one of the key reasons why a very conducive and now a realistic objective that wherein India and Russia came together. So I think as far as your question is concerned, I move beyond the ideological reins of the relationship. I think America is overdoing its stealth and power and its influence mongering all over the world. Now, we had great hopes from President Donald Trump. If we look into his campaign trail, then even the New Delhi denomination had gone on and made him sit symbolically on the lotus. Now, I'm not talking about a political party, but that was the general stratagem which was followed by the New Delhi dispensation that India and America could be blood allies with each other. But we cannot relegate to the back burner, on a second thought, the kind of fruitful and the comprehensive and traditionally emotive relationship which is shared between Putin and Modi ji or India and Russia. If we have a brief remark on it, then the historical part can also be engaged in, wherein we can say that in 2000 Putin visited India, and at that point of time, especially India was sanctioned because of its Pokhran test by America and some Western countries. So the first strategic partnership began. It was in 2010, once again jumping on to 2010, that a special and privileged word was added to the document. And 2015 also the strategic partnership was elevated. And if you look at the Indian defense armaments, which our General Saab has already talked about, 60 to 70% of the Indian military technology and equipment is of Russian origin.
Right.
So I personally feel, coming back, just give me a second.
Right.
Just your question, it is a posturing, but symmetry and diplomacy is definitely about posturing, but more issues like the bringing in of tactical BrahMos NG missiles and other air-to-air missiles that will be on the anvil of the talks, I suppose.
Right. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, but I thank you.